Hello, everybody, and welcome to the next episode of Battle Charts. I am Josh, and I'm here with my temporary co-host, Danny. How you doing, Dan?
Hello, all good. How are you?
And we have a special guest with us today, who's been on the Battle Charts podcast before. Pro Tour, sort of. I guess you're quite famous now as a UK Magic player. Everyone who's on the sort of Magic, because in the UK, everyone knows everyone in the sort of competitive Magic space, but you are known. Hi, Sean.
Hi, it's good being here.
How you doing?
Yeah, pretty good.
So,
Sean, how was Chicago then? Like overall, just like food wise, drinks.
Yeah, Chicago's great. Food's always very good. I, we had a great like testing setup. Sort of right in the city center. We got to see a lot of the city, take in the sights. Obviously, it was pretty expensive, which is the one downside of having everything in America. I would like some stuff in Europe, please, Wizards. But it was really good.
does Chicago pizza live up to the hype?
I mean, it's good, but it's not pizza, right? It's like if you view it as something more like a savory tart, it's very good.
Is it more like the deep pan? Because whenever I get a pizza, it's always like thin Italian crust, so it's like paper thin, just with
Yeah.
sauce and cheese and meat all over it.
Yeah, no, deep dish is it's basically not pizza. Like I'm not even joking. It's you have a thin layer of crust, then a huge like amount of tomato and cheese. Well, the cheese first and then tomato, and it's good. If it's done well, like some of the best places in Chicago do it really really well, but it's not pizza.
Yeah, you're basically just having a pie at that point.
Did you get much socializing done? Sort of like any on the drinks or anything like that, or was it all?
Yeah. I mean, we got a little bit. It's weird now actually. So having changed teams, even though I've only been playing the Pro Tour kind of for like a couple of solid years, like 5 years since I started, but most of that was online. Having changed teams, I now have there's a lot of close friends who are on different teams. So there is a lot of like catching up with people who, we're technically rivals now. But that's we're friends. That's
rivals without a cause. There's no ambiguity there. Yeah. Well, so
no.
That's actually quite a good segue into actually talking about the team. So it's a fairly newly sort of generated, I guess, is the word team, which is Cosmos MTG. Quite a stacked team.
Oh yeah. So I've we set up for this tournament, and I would say our roster is one of the very strongest, on the planet.
It's amazing.
I've gone from being one of the strongest members of my team to one of the weakest members, which I think is a good thing. There's no shame in that. That's very much I'm here to, I'm certainly I'm contributing a lot, and especially the limited side of things.
Yeah.
But I'm also able to learn a lot from actual world class players and even world champions, right? Like so, probably some of the biggest names in our team, say Javier Dominguez, Yuta Takahashi, both world champions.
Our Lord and Savior Yuta. Blue Black Mages.
Yeah. And Marcy Carvalho, who was not a world champion, is 3-time runner-up, and I mean, I would call him like certainly one of the very best players in the world. So.
Yeah, definitely. So, even just like looking at the roster, it's got a lot of the. I'm not trying to offend anyone here, but the old guard in a way. So like Willie Edel, when I first started playing, he was on the Pro Tour, top 8 and doing really really well for years and years and years. And I'm talking going back to Return to Ravnica blocks, and sort of onwards from that point, that's when I got into Magic, and I just remember Willie Edel like being 7 foot tall, just crushing it on the top 8 all the time.
Yeah, I
It
like.
is so stacked.
Yeah, and Willie's fantastic, and it's always it's always really positive for me to see like the quote unquote older generation of players, being the classic great players,
Yeah.
who were crushing things when I was first learning the game, and before that, still come back and still do well. Like Willie top 8'd worlds, like a year and a half ago. We just had a pro tour won by Magnus, who I'd kind of assumed would have retired and um, live off his considerable wealth at this point.
I actually love like the humility you bring to this, because you identify yourself. You are. There's no doubting that you are good at Magic. There's that self-actualization that I am good at Magic. But then you go into like a next level or you go into a room full of next level players, and you're like, I've still got room to progress. I've still got room to grow. I've still got room to develop, and I've still got, not only have I got room to learn, but I've also got the capacity to give something to these people as well, and I like that. Yeah,
yeah,
cool.
Definitely. I mean, for a team to function, you need to have everyone on the team needs to be contributing and needs to be trusted to contribute. You can have a team with a considerable difference in skill, but you need to manage the situations where you have like one player who's a lot newer and one player who's a lot more experienced. But definitely our team we're all at the level where we're all contributing, we're all can all be trusted, and everyone's input is valuable. So it's very much it's not the case that like the world champions on the team are calling the shots and everyone else is saying yes sir, that's it's like I will know the domain deck, say, in testing, I knew a lot better than some of the other players, and I was like, okay, this is how the deck is positioned, and this is what we need to test in this. It's everyone bringing their perspective. When you have everyone contributing and bringing different things, then you actually have a really effective setup.
So I'm actually quite interested, because it's something I actually just thought of just now that I actually want to ask is, it's obviously when you first start playing Magic, everyone has like an individual goal. I want to get on the Pro Tour. I want to do this. Usually it's I want to win an FNM, then I want to win an RCQ, then I want to win an RC, then I want to get into a Pro Tour. There's usually a self-actualization of goals. How does sort of your goals and the team's individualistic goals sort of manifest in a team environment? Do those goals change to sort of like a hive mind of we want the team to do well, or is that still, I guess, without a better word, like the selfish goals, are they still there? I'm just interested.
No, so at the end of the day, Magic it's a 2-player game. It's you are trying to get the best result for yourself.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're balancing, what's going to be good for the team is going to be good for you. And you do need to understand, that even if you think, right, this part of testing isn't quite as valuable for me, if it's valuable for the team, then sometimes you need to make a bit of a sacrifice and do more of that. But by and large, they align. Everyone in this team wants to essentially top 8 and win Pro Tours, right? That's no one here is saying, okay, I just want to day 2, I just want to sort of get a few more wins, and so everyone is trying to win as many games as possible.
Yeah. It's cool. So obviously the team is primarily, I'd say, funded by Heavy Play, or the Heavy Play is heavily sponsored in that team. How's Heavy Play sort of been involved in the sort of the team? Has it just been like a case of, hey, we're gonna pay for everything and here's loads of stuff, represent us, or is there like a more of like a symbiotic relationship with them in terms of the actual gameplay, etc.?
Yeah, so Heavy Play have been really good. they've actually sponsored the last two teams I've been on. So this and World Council, my previous team, and they, they're relatively new to the scene. So they've been sponsoring teams for like the last 6 months, I want to say, as opposed to like Ultimate Guard doing a lot longer.
Yeah.
And yeah, they just give us a contribution towards our expenses and what have you, and as well as lots of cool products to use when we're playing. But they've been really, really relaxed to work with, really really good. Very responsive to feedback. So, for example, when at Worlds, where I was still with World Council, we had like team shirts.
Yeah.
And one piece of feedback we had was, well, actually, even what this was Vegas in October, even then, inside with the aircon full blast, things were kind of cold. So some people wanted like a warm jumper, and like, hang on, we have Chicago coming up. Chicago in February, so they did all these lovely warm jumpers for us. That's actually really great. But yeah, I mean, sponsors, it's always nice to have a bit of extra cash. It's nice to have some of the expenses paid for, but it's much better when the company are actually good to work with.
Yeah, and when they care about you as well, definitely.
I mean, it shows that, like, if you look after people, then people are going to buy the products. If they're more personable in that way, they're just gonna go that way. And it's a great brand. What's your sort of your favorite product from them?
So I really like the playmats actually.
Yeah.
So they do these. I have it in the other room. I couldn't get it, but they do these flat playmats that are like actually rigid. And they fold up, magnetic. And so I actually grown to prefer those to the to regular classic playmats. And I've actually been using one of them as like a mouse pad, but for the arm of my armchair.
Yeah.
So when I'm not on my gaming server, when I just want to sit on the sofa or the armchair and play Modo, I can have that set up, and it's really good.
Excellent. Well, there you go. Dual purpose playmat right there.
Yeah. Because they're like very compatible. They all like snap together, and there's magnets all inside them. So like your mat will be attached to your deck box. It will then be attached to another box for your dice, and it's just, rather than having like a deck box, a play mat, and then a separate dice bag all rattling around, they seem really, really, really good.
Yeah, some smart designs.
So, we got you here because obviously you're a friendly face, but you're representing the UK. Always, every time I see the Pro Tour, I see the UK flag, I'm like, yes, because I know you did really well. Helena, shout out to Helena, did really well on the Pro Tour. UK players, it's always good to see. I'm despite what people in the Magic community think of the UK, I'm actually quite proud to be British. So yeah, I love to see the Union flag there. So obviously it's great to see you. So let's talk about the Pro Tour. Let's talk about leading up to the Pro Tour. So you're in this team now. The meta is pretty. Leading up to the Pro Tour, it was a pretty stable meta. You had the three best decks. You had or the three best sort of like archetypes. You had the domain archetypes. You had the aggro archetypes, however they would look like at the time, whether it be mono red green, etc. And then you had the bounce strategies, the blue black, and the Esper versions. So those are sort of the three pillars of the format. But you didn't go that way. So could you talk to us through your approach to standard and then your testing process up until the Pro Tour itself?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, so I'll start off with a bit of a brag in that this is I think the single biggest impact I personally have had on a Pro Tour metagame.
Yep.
Because so a few weeks before the Pro Tour, say 3 weeks before the Pro Tour, people aren't actually playing domain. Like you go back and look at the Goldfish results for 3 weeks before the Pro Tour. It's not putting up many results and challenges. And then I'm looking at this and thinking, okay, I think domain might be quite well positioned now, but it's I'm not going to innovate on the deck, but I am just going to play the Modo Showcase Challenge, so fairly important event, with just stock domain, and I play stock domain, I farm Esper Pixie, win the challenge.
Yeah, I noticed that. I saw the tweet.
And then by a week later, the play rate of domain has more than doubled, and it's winning multiple challenges, splitting the finals. So that's changing, genuinely changing the meta quite a lot, by raising the profile of domain as a choice, making it clear that this is one of the obvious ways to attack Pixie, probably decreasing the meta share of Pixie, which was, I would say, before the Pro Tour, maybe quite a bit ahead of Red at one point. As the top deck of the format. And then, so yeah, the metagame is shifting a bit. It's definitely those three decks at the top. Right? You have Domain, which in theory is beating Pixie, which in theory is beating Red, and Red, which is in theory beating Domain. And how much each beats each is about how you build the decks, and is up for some debate. But that is the rock paper scissors, if you like, at the top. And so I do a lot of the testing for domain. I try and make the deck a bit better. We work together with some of the people in the house who are really good at mana bases. We get a much cleaner mana base. We try things like more rides ends. But one thing we find.
Sorry, the cutting of I know it's the cutting of the cards just popped out my head. The land that makes your creatures uncountable.
Yeah, Cavern of Souls.
Cavern of Souls. Yeah. I've thought the cutting of Cavern of Souls was a big thing.
Yeah. In the end, I think only Matt Nass played 0 copies, but a lot of people played 1 or 2 copies, compared to the 3 or 4 that had been stocked previously. I think the fewer you played, the better. Essentially, people were not playing that many counter spells that tournament. But so we test a lot with domain, and what we find, which is uniquely possible in a house with kind of multiple world-class players, but when we're playing against really good red aggro players, the matchup is just so much worse than against random red players, because random red player isn't really going to respect something like Ride's End or Elspeth's Might. They're going to make stupid attacks, and they're going to make bad mulligan decisions. If you have a red player who is happy to just mulligan the hands that are too slow and just maximize their chances in the matchup, then we were finding the win rate was below 40%.
Wow.
And you're getting completely slaughtered on the draw, and then maybe you were slightly ahead on the play.
Yeah.
And we couldn't find a way to fix this matchup. So, and I think this was borne out in the results. You look at the win rate matrix from the tournament. It did end up performing about 40% in that matchup. And we were concerned that if there was more red, you didn't really have matchups good enough to justify that 40% or worse matchup. Esper was favored, but it was still close in a lot of cases. It wasn't crushing. So I was dismayed by this. So I was I wanted to play domain, but I then saw what was happening with some of our other teammates, and Yuta Takahashi and Marco Del Pive had been testing Omniscience for the last few days. They tested some interesting builds of the deck with a red splash. In the end, they abandoned that and went back to playing blue-white version. And this deck was one that I was aware of, but had actually got a really important card from the new set, Stock Up.
Yes.
So, Stock Up will be known. I mean, should now be known to basically every standard player.
And legacy
Is
player
already
now.
very known to every legacy player and every vintage player.
Yeah.
The card increases in power a lot when you have like more powerful cards and more powerful free spells in your format.
Yeah.
In the case of Omniscience, the moment I've told this story to everyone I've talked to about my tournament, but the moment I realized I was going to play Omniscience was when I watched Utah on turn 3 on the draw cast a stock up, pick up Omniscience and another card, and discard Omniscience to hand size. And at that point, I'm like, okay, no, like the only, in theory, the only downside of stock up in this deck is you still need a way to get Omniscience to the graveyard.
Yeah.
The fact you do that on the draw, turn 3, is ridiculous.
Yeah.
And then the card gives you a lot more selection. It gives you a lot more resilience against hate. It's probably one of the best paste forward cards. You can just find your answers to hate. You can fight through anything, and you fizzle a lot less on your actual combo turns. The old version of the deck, sometimes you would cantrip, get a cantrip miss. Now you're like, stock up, get 2 cantrips, you're not going to miss.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
Stock up into stock up, you're never going to miss.
A lot of people have been alluding it to dig through time because it's just so good. And people are just playing it in vintage as well. If a card from that's legal and standard is getting played as 4-ofs in vintage and legacy and these formats with the most powerful cards in existence, you should probably play them in standard, right? Even if it is in like a combo that reanimates an Omniscience.
Yeah, and it's weird. It was very clearly, one of the most powerful cards from Ether Drift. It was also one of the most awkward cards to try and find a home for, right? Because you need to be a combo deck or a tap-out control deck to take full advantage of it, because you are spending 3 mana and you're not affecting the board.
Yeah.
So as a main deck card, that doesn't fit into any like aggro mid-range tempo strategy. And it's even awkward if you're looking at a control deck as sort of a classic control deck. Team Handshake actually brewed a very good tap out blue-white control deck as well. I say tap out, they have some counter spells, but it's mostly turn 3 stock up, turn 4 Overlord, or turn 5 Wrath, right? That's and stock up. If you find a shell for it, then it's clearly one of the most powerful cards. So we found Omniscience, and again, this was already a deck, being developed by so mostly by an Italian guy on Team Dracani. So the Italian guy goes by Zomp Tamfo online. And I actually met him in person a few months ago when the deck was still completely secret. I was like doing a team trios tournament with one of his teammates at Bologna 4 Seasons, and he comes up between rounds and says, "Sean, I have this really cool deck, but I can't show you it." I'm like, "No, you show me it."
And you can't say that to me. You can't come up to me and say, "I got something really cool, but you can't see it." No.
Yeah. So I end up seeing it, and I'm like, "Oh, that's something really cool." And then I don't think about it much more for a while, but we're very much aware of it. And by this point, this is public, and it's they put out a guide, but it's not being respected. It keeps coming up in conversation, like when we're trying a brew out. So we do try out a lot of brews in house. We'll test. Like, we'll try and kill our brews off early. You find out what works, what doesn't, what's worth continuing to commit time to. And we often find in conversation, we say, "Oh yeah, I mean, obviously this just loses to Omniscience," right? Like, anything that doesn't have a really effective, like, proactive plan, anything that isn't utilizing counter spells, is just going to fold to this turn 4 combo deck. And if you have an effective plan against Graveyard Hate, then which stock up and Blast Zone, kill Ghost Vacuums and Lockdown, we have a good clan. Suddenly there's no worrying matchups. Like the worst matchups are things like blue-black mid-range, like where they have an aggressive plan backed up by counter spells. But that deck isn't seeing play.
No.
Probably our worst matchup that turned up in real numbers at the Pro Tour was the new Jeskai Oculus deck.
Yeah.
Again, because it's aggressive with counter spells.
Yeah.
And yeah, that was rough, but not atrocious. Like and then we're balanced out. So we look at the metagame, look at what we're expecting to face. We're crushing Domain. They have rest in peace postboard, but you have so much time to find answers for that.
Yeah.
And you're always going to get to a point where you can safely combo and.
I mean, they're just got the hands of like board wipes and like single removals, and you're just like, yeah, pass turn, yeah, sure. I'm just gonna build my hand and build my combo, and then I'm just gonna execute you as soon as you give me that opportunity.
Yep. We found with main deck temporary lockdowns, we were actually like pretty much 50-50 against Esper, and definitely 50-50 against Red. Maybe slightly better, but those matchups were not worrying. So we were pretty convinced we had a positive spread against the top 3 decks. And then like you bring out random decks from the the other category, and you just have deck after deck after deck that loses to Omniscience. Yeah, as in fully doesn't have a shot.
Yeah.
Like people bringing turn 5 combo decks, people bringing like
Reanimator packages.
I faced. Yeah, I faced some Monument to Endurance combo deck, which was sweet, but couldn't reasonably beat Omniscience. Like so yeah, it was. So I guess to summarize the process, it was I liked Domain going in. We found Domain was losing too badly to Mono Red, and then some of our other teammates found that Omniscience was actually really good now that stock had been printed, and its metagame positioning was highly desirable. So in the end, 5 of us brought that. So that was me, Yuta, Pivo, Adri, Edwin Niga Tastet, and Willie Adel, and we all bought this deck, and I think overall we got like a 57% win rate, which suddenly at the Pro Tour, that's a good win rate for a deck.
Because we had Arnie Huschenbecker also did well with just like the tap out blue white control deck, which I thought I was convinced that control was just dead in standard. With counter spells not being very good because Cavern of Souls, etc. But but it's surprising what you said about Domain though, because I watched the top 8 and we had 2 red decks or 3 red decks in the top 8. Dan will correct me on that. 3
red decks.
And in that top 8, I thought red deck's gonna win. But when you actually watched when you actually watched the match, the red deck just lost the Domain just to like awkward draws, and you're like,
and part of that is Domain does have game against everything. It's even if I call red a 40% matchup, some of those 40% you win will look dominant. It'll be you're attacking for 6 lifelink on turn 4, right? But also the fact that Meatmas was seeded first did play a role in that. In that, I was saying, so when I talk about the Domain red matchup, Domain is slightly ahead on the play and very far ahead on the draw. Well, if you're seeded first, then you're going to be on the play for the first game pre-board and the first game baseboard. So that is a bit of an advantage. That can't be like understated.
Because in our group chat, I was seeing there was like all of these people on Domain. There was 3 Domain overloads in the top 8, and then there was Mono Red, the Mice deck, and then the Leyline deck as well. And I said in our group chat, I was like, Mono Red surely got to win this. It's got 3 very, very slow decks, and then it gets absolutely stomped. Like Mono Red just does what Mono Red does best in just drawing lands when you need a certain card off to the top of the library. Like he was looking for a Sunspine Links for about 4 turns, and then just got overpowered just by an Overlord that came off of Impend. It was ridiculous. I couldn't watch the final.
He was a turn behind.
2 hours for game 1.
He was a turn behind. That I remember that Links he was digging for that. I forget the name, but he was literally like a top deck away. Like if it was the other way around, his blast 2 cards, you probably would have got that game. But yeah, it was very interesting.
Yep. Yeah, but that's one of the really attractive things about Domain is you don't have any, aside from Omniscience, you don't have any matchups where you're getting completely slaughtered. Like, your aggro matchups, you're behind, but you can still just kill them, and you do have the consistency of being like a beanstalk deck. You are going to, I personally much prefer playing a deck like Domain to a deck like Mono Red. So I don't like the idea that I don't know. I don't like the idea of just losing those games where you draw a few lands in a row in your aggro deck and you die to the big lightning creatures.
It's losing to no agency that I'm not a fan of. That's why I've always been if there's no blue in the deck, I'm not really attracted to it. I need to have like some sort of level of cantrip or some sort of level of card draw or card advantage, and so it mitigates. Sorry, you add in agency to a game of Magic, which already has like a 30% fail rate.
Definitely, and I guess so. Omniscience does have a little bit of that in that it is fundamentally a deck where if you don't have Omniscience in the top 45 cards of your deck, you're going to find it very difficult to win that game. So you will lose a small fraction of your games in a very low agency way. But you do have a lot of card draw, you have a lot of selection, and at the end of the day, you're happy to just take the very small chance that you'll have a complete non-game where you can never get there. So you will have frustrating games where you win if you find the Omniscience in time, but you are getting to play, for the most part, a fairly high selection, high agency game.
So you led to know, but you sort of your thought processes and testing processes within the team. But when you get together with your testing house, is there is there a set schedule that you follow up until the Pro Tour? And if there is, do you mind talking about that?
Yes, I mean we're basically meeting each day and figuring out. Look, these are the priorities we're going to work on. We're going to test. It was a little different this time, so we had a lot less time to actually prepare for the event, because set release for Ether Drift was I think that the release date was technically 1 week before the tournament. And so it was on, pre-release was 2 weeks before. It was online for a week and a half before the tournament, but really, no time at all to actually test.
It really did challenge the pros, to be fair.
Yeah, definitely. And in particular, in trying to balance constructed and limited, that creates a lot of challenge because you need to get in at least enough house drafts, enough pod drafts that you're feeling confident, that you're feeling you can take what you learn from online drafts and the stats side of things, but then apply it to a real scenario and develop these strategies in an actual pod draft context. And you need a certain amount of drafts to get that. But balancing that with doing all of the legwork in constructed, testing all these matchups, testing the brews, testing the both the new decks and the old decks. It's just physically a lot of work and a lot of hours. And you don't have that much.
A lot of packs being opened.
Yeah. But then, so in the end, we tested quite a lot less limited than our previous team. And there's always swings and roundabouts, right? So compared to say World of Council this time, our team did much better in constructed, but somewhat worse in limited. And some of that, is just because as a team, we didn't get as many drafts in. We got, I think, 5 drafts at the house, and which is a reasonable number. It's certainly more than the bare minimum. But I would say the council probably got like 8 or 9 drafts. And getting each additional draft once you're already like getting the hang of things, okay, I know what the cards are, I know what our level 1 strategies are, and now we're going to try and metagame. And yes, there's always a risk that the house drafts get inbred, but there's also, at that point, is where you see some of the more interesting things coming out of the draft. And so, getting an extra couple of drafts is highly valuable.
Yeah.
But we did the best we could, I think, with the time we had. And a lot of it is just trying to use what time you have as efficiently as possible. We're meeting every day, setting these tasks, and who is going to do what. So generally, one person will take the lead for each deck, and we'll say, look, this deck is looking promising. Let's put more people working on this, or this deck has these problems. If we can solve them today, then we keep working. If we can't solve them, then the deck's dead. We work on other stuff. So just trying to be efficient and trying to get rid of things that aren't working.
You practice quite a lot of discipline then in all aspects. So not only are you disciplined in what you play, what you're testing, how you're testing, scheduling, all that, but discipline in the fact that if we can't solve this problem by this time, the problem's gone. The problem, there's no problem. We're just gonna get rid of it and not think about it. And
I mean,
there's a lot of discipline there, because especially for someone who sort of like mine and Dan's level, aspiring pros, we kind of have pet decks, and it's really hard to put a pet deck down. Like, to me, I in standard, I'm Dimir tempo to my core, and I would really find it hard to say pick up domain, because all I want to do is cast endurance, curiosity, and it's that discipline that I find quite fascinating, especially with the sort of background, professional background I'm in, etc. I find it quite fascinating.
Yeah, definitely. And there's always a little bit of a balance. So you need to understand, when you're in a testing house, that even at a high level, people will have deck preferences. I am not likely to play a red aggro deck. Or certainly much less likely to play a red aggro deck than a combo deck. So, a good team will usually end up on like 2 or 3 different decks, unless there's some really clear broken deck. And even then, sometimes there'll still be splits. Like, I remember Shake at Pro Tour Amsterdam, most of them played Nadu, but a few of them still played like Jeskai Control, in a version that was tuned to beat Nadu and some of the other like top decks, and part of that was because those players did lean towards control decks. So there's always, you need to understand people play different decks, but people do want to win as much as possible. So I'm not going to play a bad combo deck. I am going to scrap my combo deck if it doesn't work, and hopefully find an alternative that still lies within kind of my the range with which I'm most confident.
And I think that's what it is as well, because I think baseline to when you're playing a deck or playing an archetype, you have to be that player or can play that strategy. So, for example, if I've got Nadu, for example, and the Jeskai control deck, I know Nadu is the best deck, but I fundamentally know the ins and outs to Jeskai control. Like, I am a Jeskai control ninja. Like I am confident with it. I know the sideboard options. I know how to sideboard. I know all that, but I'm not so good at all that intricacies with Nadu, even though it is the best deck. So there's a level in which the best deck carries you, but then your fundamental understanding of an archetype or deck will bring you up on par. So I've always said, like, to a new player, like, if you're looking at a deck to build, and you don't like the look of T1 decks, but you know how to pilot T2 decks very well. I mean, I took Infect to a Legacy tournament when just before Bowmasters was printed, and top 8 Axiom with it. Everyone was like, "What the hell is Infect?" I think I was the only Infect player in the room, but I fundamentally understood that deck to the point where I only dropped one game all day, which was the important game, obviously in top 8. So that's sort of like the way I'm leaning in what you're explaining in terms of working towards your strengths, and if those strengths line up with the top decks, then that's a good thing.
Yeah, well, but you touch on another topic, which I think is playing something unknown or less known has a lot of value to it. So if you're playing, like, I mean, I guess Jesco Control was always fairly known, but if you're playing some weird-ish version of the control deck, say you're playing the dress down version of Jesco Control during the early weeks of MH3 Standard,
yes,
then that's people are going to play against you worse than if you're playing Storm or Nadu or something very, very popular, very known. People are just going to have fewer reps against you. Like, if you play the best deck in the format, everyone will have hundreds of reps in that matchup. But if you bring quote unquote nonsense deck, some brew or some tier 3 deck.
Shout out George.
Yeah. But then people will play worse against you.
Yes.
And it's always, you can't push it too far. The deck needs to be good, and it needs to be justifiable in the metagame. You can't bring a bad deck, but if you can bring a good deck that is a bit unknown, which Omniscience, I think, qualified, then you will get equity from players just not playing well against you, even at the Pro Tour. Like I had very, very strong players. I think make sideboarding errors, or at least sideboarding decisions that wouldn't make sense if they had played the matchup 100 times and knew how that would look face board.
It sort of invalidates, like you said, I'm not a naturally good Magic player. Like, I need to get reps. As soon as I understand the matchup, I'm very confident in that. But the moment you get a deck, like, what is this doing? Like, I don't have the fundamental, I guess, see the matrix of the game to go, I know what this deck is kind of trying to do. I know how to sideboard it properly or attack it from a different angle. Dan, however, just goes, go fast.
Yeah,
mono red player.
that was my exact thought when I seen your deck list for the Pro Tour. I was like, it's got Omniscience in, now what? And then you sort of piece it together with when you see the Awakening. It's like, okay, maybe it's doing something there, but then what? And I couldn't figure it out. I had to watch like one YouTube video 5 times just to understand the combo.
Dan was like, best removals, player removal.
Yeah, exactly. Just Monstrous Rage.
Yeah, it's always a good sign when every time you sit down, your opponent asks to read some of the cards in your sideboard.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Like, what does Johann's Stopgap do? What does Sunder the Gateway do?
Yeah.
Like, if they ask to read Season of Weaving, then you know you're in for a good time.
Oh yeah, definitely.
That's great. So how did you find the actual like limited part of Aether Drift, and compared to, like, because we had Duskmorn before, and Duskmorn was a very popular set, very fun limited format, quite high power in certain aspects, but Aether Drift, when we first got spoiled, it was kind of like, it was a bit of a meme. It looked a bit like Borderlands / Gone in 60 Seconds / Wacky Racers. Like, it was like, because I wasn't excited for this set at all, but I played a bit on Arena, and I found it actually quite fun. Pretty heavy power in the sort of green side of things, but how did you find it?
Yeah, I think it's a really well designed set. Like you, I sort of at first wasn't super impressed by a lot of the theming, and like I assumed some of the mechanics like speed wouldn't play particularly well. But it has really grown on me. So, and yeah, the green has been quite strong. But I think it's a little overhyped, and the colors are relatively balanced. Like there are things you can do in each color combination that kind of work. Even white red, which was that's the ugly duckling of all the combinations. It's not you look at 17 lands, it's like multiple percentage points behind the next one. It's just not doing well at all. But some people found ways to build that deck. So there were like I found sort of a more mid-range way to just take advantage of the red white 2-drop by going larger and playing like larger vehicles, loads of ride sends, and just trying to grind the opponent out. But then I also saw a really sweet brew by the World Council people with like 15 lands and sort of hyper aggro going wide, playing a lot of the red white 2-drop and also the white 2-drop that scries when it enters.
Yeah.
And the fact you can have a strategy like that emerge from the format and work in the format, as well as these huge grindy green decks, as well as the artifact decks, the exhaust decks. You have and like the black red speed decks. You just have a lot of options in the format.
Yeah.
So yeah, I found it very fun to draft. Frustrating as a set to try and solve or trying to understand on a very restricted time. I would have probably, like I said, enjoyed testing more if I'd had just a couple of extra days to jam house pod drafts in that format. But in the tournament, I actually had my worst limited record at a Pro Tour, which is 3-3, so it's still not awful. But yeah, I started with a 1-2 draft and then lost the finals of my Day 2 draft to some ridiculous deck with, I think one of the games they curved turn 3 Lumbering World Wagon into turn 4 Sabsunan. So yeah, that happened. But the format was a lot of fun. Yeah.
That's great. So like, you come to say for example you had more time. What would be like as a team? I guess it literally is the testing house. I'm quite fascinated by the testing house. You might not guess because I'm always coming back to it. Because it's sort of like the fantasy in me. I've got 2 jobs, a family, etc. I'm very rarely going to get the chance to get into a house with all my teammates slamming games for like a week on end. When you actually approach a draft format, particularly one like this where you've only had days to do it, how does the conversation and the process go with card evaluation and color combination evaluation and all that? Like how does the conversation start to the point where you're drafting and you're testing?
Yeah, so you try and there's a few parts of it. Right? You try and get everyone to at least have some grounding in online drafts and playing beforehand. So people have played with most of the cards. They get a feeling for most of the cards. And then we have the statistical background, so the 17 land stuff, for just a very rough idea. So we can say, look, these cards are clearly doing very well. Let's look at these. Look at why they're doing well. These cards are doing badly. Use caution. But we're not saying take these cards because the stats are high. Don't take these cards because the stats are low. We're saying, look, here's our preliminary data. Let's investigate based on this. Because again, the 17 lands is from best of one. It's from arena. It's from weaker players. And a lot of things are going to change once you get into a pod draft of 8 people playing best of 3 and in a very high skill environment. So yeah, it's a lot of it, I try and structure around the stats as just a useful like jumping off point.
Yeah.
But by far the most important thing for me is the actual house drafts, the pod drafts. So we get to, we sit down, do a draft, and then review afterwards and see each seat exactly what happened. What cards performed well, what key interactions we learned, and what we learned about how to build that archetype and that deck. And then ideally over the course of the week, we gain a much more solid picture of each of the archetypes, and we can say, okay, these are the different decks in the format. These are the ways card evaluation has changed for each of these decks. These are the ways you go around building those decks, and this is how you end up getting into that deck in a draft, at a table. So I guess, red, white, to go back to it, maybe you get into that because it's clearly open. You've wheeled the red, white 2-drop because everyone wants to stay out of that color. And it helps. And for the mid-rangey version of that, it helps if you've opened a Wrath, either the 5-mana white Wrath, the white-red Wrath.
Yeah.
And you get those points. So that's how you get into it. And then this is what it wants to look like with this many Rise Ends, this many the 5-mana common white vehicle, and then this is how that deck functions. So it's just gaining that picture throughout the course of the week. But again, so much harder this time with less time.
Yeah, must be stressful. Like I know Bologna's coming up towards the end of April, and the Kansas Arcade set drops like a week, 2 weeks before the RC. So I can imagine that's going to be stressful. No draft yet, but from a constructor standpoint, that would be stressful. So I can imagine when all you've seen is just essentially spoilers and you've not had the chance to play those cards. I could imagine it would be stressful,
especially with the impact that standard sets have been having. I mean, look at modern now. Boros Energy was the deck to beat, and now all of a sudden you've got Ketramos bouncing things out, and that was brought in from a standard set. There's bombs in standard set. Oculus in the previous set, Dustmourne, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I've worked 12 hours today, so it's so my point on that you were making, Dan, is the fact that it is one of those things, like how impactful a standard set's going to be, because the last couple of sets they've completely changed modern metagames. So how are they going to affect standard metagames, for example?
Yeah. Well, sometimes less than the impact of modern. I think this time, this is one of the lower impact standard sets on standard. In that you had a few cards that were upgrading specific decks. Ride's End upgrading Domain, Knock Up upgrading Omniscience, and kind of enabling a new deck in the duo control. But for the most part, if you brought a deck with no new cards, like the Ghoul decks, for example, they didn't have new cards. A lot of the Esper decks were playing a couple of Grim Bauble or Momentum Breaker, but most of the good cards were the previous cards. So I think standard, this standard was one of the cases where suddenly what we had before was so powerful and such a hard format to break, and then nothing ridiculous was printed. As you say, Ketramos probably the most impactful card in Eternal formats, maybe second to Stockout.
But they have the tools to enable it. You don't really have the tools to enable it properly in standard.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. So I've sort of want to just move on to sort of ending the podcast now. But before we go into the spicy subject you agreed we'd talk about, what's the future for Sean then? What's the future for Team Cosmos? What's the future for your what were you going to next, for example?
So I'm qualified for all the Pro Tours this year. So I'm qualified for Vegas and Atlanta. And I'll continue working with Team Cosmos. It's a fantastic group. I've really enjoyed working with them so far, and like I said, I'm learning a lot. I'm incredibly humbled to be working with such great players. But I also feel like our team is we're working really well together and improving. So I'm excited to see what we do next time. I'll also be at Regional Championship Bologna, mainly because it's Italy, it's fantastic, it's really good food, and it's standard. I'm skipping all the modern tournaments. I know there's a really interesting looking modern tournament this weekend in Switzerland, which I was slightly tempted to go to, but honestly, modern is just a little depressing right now. So I am playing standard and not playing modern.
You need to play more Merctides.
So yeah,
you might be happy then. I've been just on
yeah,
Merctides and
maybe.
loving it.
If Breach wasn't around, would you be on the plane to Switzerland and play modern this weekend?
I mean, maybe it's such a hard question because I don't know what the metagame actually looks like if Breach isn't around. You take Breach out of the metagame, it actually affects a lot of what's at the top.
Yeah.
Like maybe Amulet looks broken at that point. Maybe Eldrazi is crushing things.
Broken. That deck just doesn't die. That deck is the best thing to do in modern, and it always has been. And
yeah,
that deck.
So the copy pasta, has remained tier 1 or 0 through all these metas.
I tell you what,
it's hard to play, guys. It's hard to play. There's no point banning anything because it's a hard deck to play. Okay.
Yeah. If Lucas can play it, mate.
But yeah, I don't need to play modern for the foreseeable future. So they actually announced that Vegas is going to be standard again. So we have 2 standard Pro Tours in a row.
That's great.
Part of which is I love standard too, and particularly for Pro Tour, I think it's one of the most exciting formats.
I agree.
To have at the Pro Tour, and will really showcase their new set, which is Final Fantasy in standard. So, I've not actually played any Final Fantasy games, but
I remember,
obviously they're hugely popular.
I remember running home when I was in year. What would it have been? Like year 8 or something like that. Running home to play Final Fantasy 8, getting Squall, getting Tifa. Well, not Tifa, but getting Squall, getting my GFs on the go, and then I skipped Final Fantasy 9, went straight to Final Fantasy 10. Loved that game. Oh my god. Like I'm looking forward to Final Fantasy. I'm not so hot on the Universes Beyond stuff, and I'm not so hot on the prices they're charging for it. But that's a different topic for a different podcast. But I'm excited for this one, and this is I think this for me was like, because I like Lord of the Rings as well. I think the fact that the set for Final Fantasy is going to hit me like I think it hits some people with Lord of the Rings, and it'll hit some people with say like Marvel and that. Like I can't stand Marvel, but well, it's not I can't stand it, but I'm not interested in it. But yeah, this is like I'm excited for this. See, I'm interested.
Yeah, it should be fun. And again, I'm coming from a neutral mindset of I've not played the games, but if the set's designed well, which most sets recently, full credit to Wizards, have been designed well.
Yeah.
We've had a lot of good limited sets the last year or so. And we've had some really impactful and interesting designs constructed.
It's a big IP. So, like I know Lord of the Rings is a big IP, but Final Fantasy is a big IP.
Yeah.
So they've got to do it well, and it's backed up by Square Enix, etc. Whatever they're called now, Square, whatever they're called. But yeah, it'll be an interesting set. I'm looking forward to how they pull it off. And the Universes Beyond stuff, and this is the only point I'm going to make on this, is that if you look at like Magic and you look at like the universes and the multiverse and all that, like if you didn't know about Final Fantasy and that was just made into a multiverse, like it's sort of like you just go into a new plane almost is the way I'm sort of seeing it. But the fact that it's from a different IP and you're like even the Lord of the Rings stuff, like if you spun that like as a separate world, you might have got away with it. I don't know.
I mean,
I think it's.
Go on. Sorry.
No, it's just gonna say it's less jarring to me than something that is actually like tonally and thematically completely different to Magic. Like, I don't know what's a good example? I guess the Fortnite secret lair, right? If they did a full Magic set of Fortnite, I might quit the game. That's such an absurd like departure from the from the tone and themes of Magic.
SpongeBob's
But something
coming.
like Final Fantasy, something like Lord of the Rings, you have so much overlap of the fantasy theming and the world building. It sort of makes sense.
I just want to live in Kamigawa. Like that set, I love that set so much. Like that, everything about that set was everything I like. Like ninja, Japanese, neon, like all that sort of stuff. I could imagine some synth wave in the background, like that's sort of I love all that stuff. But anyway, enough about that. Do any of you lads want to talk about something before we move on to the little controversial topic we want to talk about to finish off?
No, all good.
Sound. So, the discourse from the Pro Tour, a massive discourse was on about sloppy play and cheating amongst an environment that was supposed to be of pros. Now, the premise of what I'm guessing where I'm coming from is that the RC system, or the system to get to the Pro Tour, is completely changed before it was after it's been RPTQs. It's a lot quote unquote easier to get on the Pro Tour now. You could do like an F&M style RCQ. I've heard people qualified off 8-round RCQs. 3-round RCQs with 8 people in it. Then you go to an RC, you somehow spike to get to top 32 or whatever. Then you're on the Pro Tour. There was a lot of new faces in the Pro Tour. A lot of first-time people were doing really well, especially on day one. But there was a lot of reports of sloppy play, a lot of reports of cheating. I just want to know what your lads' opinion of it, of all this sort of discourse is. Probably talk to you first, Dan, because then obviously Sean's got real world experience of being there, and you might know more about the the ins and outs of people's experiences in terms of gameplay pressures. New people that looks like sloppy play or cheating, but actually just completely innocent, and they're used to the sort of the more competitive Realm Magic rather than the pro Realm Magic. So, what was your opinion on this, Dan? Like, how did you? Because we've obviously talked about this on the group chat, etc.
Yeah. So I'm obviously not as experienced as Sean. I've not been to Pro Tours. The height of my competitive Magic experience is going to RC Lille back in November, and at that point there was a fair few judge calls where it didn't seem as though the judge calls weren't recorded, and any like game rule violations or anything, or warnings or anything along those lines didn't seem to have been recorded in a way. So say if I cheat against Josh and then I get a game warning or a warning for that, and then 4 games later I cheat against Sean, then there's no previous record of me cheating in that tournament, and it would just be slap on the wrist again, don't do it. So I feel as though that the old judging system way back when that used to be
when judges were supported,
tracked, when judges were supported, exactly. It seemed to be a lot better for the game, and it felt more judged. It doesn't seem as though that the judges are judges now. They just seem as though that they're there to be walking, talking rule books in a way. I don't know if that's maybe fair for me to say, but that's just sort of like how I feel on it. But yeah, it's just a bit weird, I think.
How are you, Sean? How was it, the sort of feeling on the ground and this sort of looking at it from...
Yeah, so it's interesting, right? So there's a couple of issues, right? There's the stuff from the player side and the stuff from the judges side. And obviously I know more about the player side, but I will talk about the judges side quite quickly. So the way, so some of how warnings were implemented hasn't actually changed that much. What has changed more is judge staffing and kind of just judging at events. In that it's perhaps not unreasonable to say that there is less there is a less rigorous system in place to ensure that all events have good judges than there was in the past. And people will quibble as hell. There've always been some judges sort of not doing that well. But but when you had a very clear global judge system and regional judge systems, and some of then you at least had a structure to that, and some of that still exists, but a lot of it is just on each organizer. So it's up to Fanfinity, right, to hire good judges and to have a structure that enforces good judge calls. And I'm not saying that judging has gotten worse, but I am saying I'm always a little nervous of the loss of those systems leaves the door open for things to get worse, for things to slide, and so a lot of it ends up being on players to say, "Oh, hang on, I want to appeal this, or this is not right." And most players are going to know the rules, and certainly aren't going to know the infraction procedure guide side of rules to anywhere near that level. But then when you actually going to the Pro Tour, a lot of the discourse was around, certainly on camera, there were a couple of notable instances of, depending on who you asked, either people trying something on or just innocent mistakes in the heat of the moment. I'm not going to pass judgment on which was which in those cases. But I do think I'm inclined to give a lot of benefit of the doubt, specifically to people playing on the feature match, and specifically to people playing in one of their first ever Pro Tour feature matches. I know that the first time I was on a Pro Tour feature match, I was terrified. Obviously, and it is a huge thing. It's
big pressure.
Yeah, and particularly for people who are doing that at their first Pro Tour, people who've, as you say, have won a small RCQ and then spiked one RC and gone to the Pro Tour. They're not actually going to have that much experience playing at that level. So things like so the case of changing the mana you've tapped to draw a card. That looks incredibly dodgy on camera. But if you're doing a testing game, if you're testing a matchup and you say, we're going to play this matchup 20 times and we want to find out who's ahead, that's something you would do. You would say to your opponent, "Oh, obviously this was just a clear brain fart. We're just doing this, right?" You can't do that as a Pro Tour. You can't do that in an actual game. But if you've done way more testing games than real games, maybe that's something you do by muscle memory. It's an entirely different argument whether that still needs to be punished by, disqualification, right? Are you saying, look, this is something suspicious enough, it's kind of cast doubt on on your play, and maybe you need to be DQ'd? I don't think that's wholly unreasonable. I think it's draconian, but I wouldn't, if someone was disqualified and then not banned, which I certainly wouldn't say you're banned, that would not be a ridiculous punishment. And I do think they need to be they certainly need to be strict about recording these as warnings and tracking behavior over the course of a tournament. But then, when I certainly don't want to gatekeep the Pro Tour, right? I think it's great that you have a lot of first-time players at the Pro Tour.
Definitely.
I don't like the fact that the Pro Tour is bigger with the same prize pool, because that is actually a price cut. I would like to have a higher EV playing, but inherently getting more people is good for the game. I would like more people have the opportunity to play their first Pro Tour, and people are going to. I've even made some mistakes that I'm sure looked very dodgy in the moment. Just because it's I don't know, you do something wrong in a way that's highly advantageous for you, and you find out multiple times later, you call a judge, and it's too late at that point, and you've gained a huge advantage from it, because that's you've not cheated, but in terms of the game state and the effects on it, you've been given a warning, and you've gained a huge advantage for free by playing sloppily, and that feels very bad. But I don't think, like, I think some of this will come with getting more players in. I think some of this will hopefully improve over time as players gain more experience playing at that level, get less nervous. But I also think it's a little. It's probably the discourse around it is a little overhyped, just overblown.
I think so.
Because you had a few incidents on camera.
I mean, people. It always felt like a witch hunt. We're not going to name people. There's a few instances in the top 8, and it was like a massive witch hunt, and it was like obviously you don't want people to give these, because there's people on Twitter that they will find an excuse to moan and to target people, and you don't want to give these people the tools, and rightly so. You don't want to gatekeep the Pro Tour, because you need more blood into Magic. You need new faces. You need the game to continue and thrive and get more players in, etc. So having those new people will intrinsically bring growing pains. They're not as au fait with the competitive sort of play at that level, especially when the primary source of individual testing now is Magic Online. It does a lot of stuff for you. So yeah, I'm just interested in like the causes of where this has been, and as this discourse always happened, it's I just found it interesting.
Yeah. I mean, also games are more complicated now.
Yes.
So this came up a lot as a talking point last year in terms of round timers and the amount of games going to draws, and how to address that. And I think the same applies to some extent for small errors and missed triggers and missed detrimental triggers, right? So I know one of the cases that came up was missed triggers in a domain deck, either Beanstalk or Overlord onwards. Looks dodgy in context, but if you play domain in paper at a high level, it's really hard not to miss any triggers. There's a lot of stuff going on. Your each turn is like, okay, cast my spells, these on the stack, these many Beanstalk triggers, and at the end of the turn, these, and each attack, these Overlord triggers, and at the end of the turn, these Overlord triggers. And all this with a board that has, at least 20 bits of paper on it. It's very easy for things to slip. I'm not giving 100% benefit of the doubt. I do think like Sunspine Links versus Overlord is something judges should be looking at very, very carefully.
Yes.
And they should be there should be like discussions amongst the judge team beforehand, which there might have been, I don't know. But to say, look, we're going to view this as a detrimental trigger rather than a beneficial trigger because of this interaction, and we are going to scrutinize this and we are going to hand out warnings. I think there needs to be that level of judging, certainly at the Pro Tour. But I don't think I don't think screwing up when playing Domain is inherently suspicious. I think it's one of the harder decks to actually keep track of everything, keep everything perfectly sort of organized. So
cool. So I'm happy we're coming to a close there, boys. Do you want to add anything towards the end? Any sort of shout outs or any sort of social media shout outs or anything like that?
Sure. I mean, follow me on Twitter and I guess Blue Sky now as well. I'm Sean Goddard.
We need to get on that,
also follow.
I need to make a Blue Sky account. You just reminded me.
Yeah. Also Team Cosmos. Have a Twitter account. Follow us, and I will have hopefully end of this week, maybe next week. I'm writing a free Omniscience guide with Pivo, my teammate.
Oh, nice.
So we'll have that ready for everyone to look at. If you want but even then, if you want a more in-depth guide, or if you want a guide now, then go and check out Team Tukani, the guys who made the Omniscience deck to begin with. So, they built a fantastic deck. It was really fun to play. And they also did actually give it a little bit of help during testing. So,
and if you want to know how the combo works, then check that guide out because we didn't actually talk about it today.
I mean,
Dan,
you play Omniscience and then you win.
I don't have an idea how it works. Don't ask me.
Dan, do you want anything to say to finish off?
Sean, what's your favourite Magic card of all time?
I always say Muldrifter, which is just a classic limited card. I mean, the reality is I don't have a favourite. There's too many that I have experiences with, but Muldrifter is nice.
That's fair. No worries, but no, thanks for coming on. Much appreciated.
Dan, do you want to say? Don't forget to do the.
Don't forget to like, subscribe, and ding dong the notification bell, and leave a comment if you listen on Spotify.
Thank you. Cheers, boys. Have a good one. And thanks everyone for watching and listening, and I'll see you next time. Bye.